Mariya Garnet is a Ukrainian-born artist, traditionally trained psychedelic facilitator and student psychotherapist with over 15 years of experience in indigenous healing practices. Since 2008, she has been in apprenticeship with mestizo curanderos in the Peruvian Amazon. During her 8 years living full-time in Peru, Mariya co-founded Canto Luz Center for Research and Cultural Preservation, a treehouse retreat dedicated to healing and environmentalism. Mariya integrates her expertise in psychedelic therapy within the Amazonian vegetalismo tradition with modern therapeutic approaches. Currently, she leads retreats in Peru and maintains a private one-on-one practice focusing on healing complex trauma and restoring holistic health. As a postgraduate student at the Create Institute in Toronto, Mariya is deepening her knowledge in expressive arts therapy. She views creative expression as a powerful tool to an integrated self, believing that artistic practices similarly to plant medicines can help individuals access deeper levels of consciousness and embodied cognition, facilitating personal transformation. It's my pleasure to welcome Mariya to the Brain Forest Cafe. Welcome, Mariya. Thank you.
Hi, Dennis. Hi.
Good to see you again. And yeah, thank you for making the time. Let me make sure everything is the recording is rolling. So let's get into it. We are having this conversation because we have been in discussions about presenting a seminar or a one-day virtual symposium about some of the issues that come up when ceremonial or psychedelic retreats or situations when things go a bit off track. I think the name of the symposium is When the Ceremony Doesn't End. So the focus is on that, and it brings together a group of therapists who have dealt with this situation, which is rare, but it does occur, and also some traditional healers that you've worked with who've also uh, had to deal with these kinds of situations. So, do you want to elaborate a little bit on what this what this will be, what the conference will be? Let me see if I can. I'll put it up on the screen for a minute and people can see what this is. This is going to be in February 25th. And we've just begun to put up information on the website about registration and so on. It's got an excellent list of practitioners and experts. And Mariya, of course, is kind of leading it, and many colleagues that she's worked with, including our own Dr. Ranji Varghese, who is a psychiatrist and a ketamine therapist who's on the board of the McKenna Academy. So I believe this is up on the website for the McKenna Academy, and people can find more information there. All of these links will be on our podcast website. When it's up there. So with those preliminaries, tell me what inspired you to do this. What led you to decide this was a necessary thing to do, or something that you wanted to organize?
Well, it's interesting, Dennis, that we're talking about it on your podcast because all of this kind of started with your podcast with Lee Kaiser. Um, so a few months ago, you talked with Lee Kaiser, the wildlife biologist, about his experience with prolonged altered states, as we can call it for now. 2 episodes that he went through in Peru and then in Mexico. And Lee Kaiser has been a friend of mine for over a decade. We met when I was a director of Cantaluz, and he came to work with ayahuasca. He had his first ceremony with us, and we stayed in touch. So I've been in touch, and I know his story, the adventures that he went through. And in the summer, he shared the podcast he did with you, and he contacted me and he said, well, Maria, I know, you're working with plant medicines and you're taking people to retreat. So he was asking me, how can he be helpful, to me? And he said, well, I don't want to be necessarily a coach, but I want this story to serve and to be useful. And, originally he proposed me to coach maybe some of my patients, to which I replied that luckily, this is not this is not a usual story. It doesn't happen often. And we were almost ready to just kind of let the idea go. And then literally last minute when we were on Zoom, an idea came through. Why don't we do an online Q&A for practitioners? Because it's definitely, while it's a rare occurrence, these things happen, and there's very little research, very little awareness from both clinicians and retreat facilitators. So the idea was originally born as just kind of like a Q&A online on Zoom. And the more people we talked to, the more people were getting excited, like yourself, Dennis. And we're saying, well, we need to take it bigger. It really has to be out there. There's useful information. There's so much that we can talk about. So, the idea kind of snowballed, and now it's becoming a 5-hour online seminar with a big panel.
Well, I think I'm glad to see it, and I'm glad to see that the McKenna Academy is, able to help organize this, because this is an area where it's often overlooked. Facilitating psychedelic therapies, facilitating retreats, and so on, is difficult enough. Even for when this doesn't happen, it takes skill. It takes a skilled therapist or curandero, and often these roles are combined. There is no, distinct, definite distinction between them. And the interesting thing that I have sort of gleaned from talking to Lee, and I haven't known Lee as long as you have, but we met originally in the Sacred Valley, and I know that he's been, uh, that was about 5 or 6 years ago, and at that time he was deeply involved in medicine work down there, and had been for some time. And then he shared with me eventually these his experience in having these essentially breaks with ordinary reality as a result of these ceremonies that required intervention. And he had uh various kinds of intervention. He had curanderos that he had worked with who tried to help him, and that was actually, it turns out, it seems that was perhaps more effective. He had the conventional psychiatric biomedical types of intervention, and those were not so helpful. So sort of what emerged out of this, I think, in conversations with Lee, was that there is a need for this, and there's a need for therapists, particularly if they come from what you might call biomedical perspective or psychiatric perspective, to understand that the standard approaches to this are perhaps not as good as some of the traditional approaches. After all, you know, traditional healers and indigenous people have been using ayahuasca and other plant medicines for many thousands of years. They've learned a great deal more about it, perhaps, than a therapist who just goes to a certification course. Not that that's not important, but again, we come back to the idea of listen to the people that know these medicines. And so Lee suggested to me that we organize this seminar, and I was all in favor of it. And then he introduced me to you, to me, Maria, and your colleagues and I was even more in favor of it.
Thank you. Yes. I find that we really have a very rounded panel where we're going to be looking at the phenomena of psychosis, let's call it that, from different perspectives. As you mentioned, we are working with people who really do know best. There are cultures that have been using these plants for over millennia. So they do have protocols in place, safety protocols in place, and we can really learn from them. At the same time, also we can't just forget that we do have access to the biomedical modules as well, and we're not they're just two arms of the same body. What we really all want is to have positive outcomes for our patients.
Right, right. And often, uh, you're an unusual person in that you straddle both worlds, and some of your colleagues, like Yarissa, I believe, and Ranji, the people that will be on this panel, you are qualified medical therapists, you're certified psychedelic therapists, and you also are steeped in traditional medicine practices, and so you understand the power of both of those. And what do you think? I mean, my sense of it, and I'm not a therapist. I'm a humble ethnobotanist, So my preoccupation is with the plants, but what do you think needs to happen in the development of these therapies, effectively protocols for when this kind of thing happens? What is your approach, for example?
Okay, this is a big question, so I'm just gonna share my opinion. And first, no, for legalities, I have to say I'm not yet registered psychotherapist. I'm in my process, and in fact, kind of coming from the traditional training and stepping into the Western modalities, this is really, um, you know, to be able to kind of stand in both of these worlds. This is what prompted me to kind of embark on the official registration process, because yeah, it is important in many circles. What do I see happening? And again, I'm just sharing my opinion, because it's really big question. um, I believe, I personally believe that the way that traditions are taught, they're taught through experience, right? It's an experiential learning. It's impossible to learn how to administer psychedelics without really going deep down that road yourself. The same as you cannot become a psychotherapist without ever being in therapy yourself. So, unfortunately, this is kind of legal battle many of the training programs are facing right now, that the students are not necessarily even allowed legally to access the medicines that they're being taught how to treat. So I know some training programs organize journeys to, for example, Peruvian Amazon. And I think that is one, that's great way, it's a great practical way for people to see what holding space, what facilitation, looks like, and really learn from the maestros, and to see how to apply it in the Western model. I have my own biases, of course, and I have my own preferences. In my personal practice and career, I use the arts, because I believe that is exactly what stands between the science and tradition. And as an expressive art therapist in training, we call our modality the original psychotherapy, because it's something that uses and recognizes and ceremony and ritual. And this is one thing that's really is in between two models and can be understood by North Americans and Europeans. This is a language that's accessible to them, to us, to most of us, right? I am also foreigner practicing something, going down traditional route. It's a interesting path to walk, and has to be walked with lots of reverence and respect for tradition, and learning without appropriating, right? And that is what I attempt to do. And I don't know if I'm answering your question. I'm kind of going on a tangent, but yeah, that's where I find myself. Yes.
Right, right. Well, it is a huge question, absolutely. And, a couple of things. I mean, since the earliest days of psychedelics emerging into Western culture in the 60s, and people like Timothy Leary and Ralph Metzner and people like that, always talking about the importance of set and setting. I think that's the fundamental of uh, any kind of therapeutic application of psychedelics, where, I mean, they were on the right track. Setting is important, obviously. It has to be a setting that is safe, where people do not feel threatened, where they understand that they're, being looked after. And set is by far the more complex of this equation, because set is what they bring to it. And effectively, some people say set is your intention, for the session. I feel that it's way beyond that. Set is you. Set is what you're bringing to it, your whole set of life experiences and expectations. And then you have these two dynamics coming together. If the setting is not appropriate in terms of the protocols and support, then the person's experience cannot unfold in the way it needs to, because in this dynamic situation, you're having this experience here. The intention is to open up. The intention is to let go, you know, but the expectation is when you get through that, you'll be able to reconstitute, recondense. And in most cases that happens. Sometimes it doesn't, and people get lost in some kind of hyperspace. Maybe that's not the way to characterize it. But then the therapist's or the curandero's task becomes, that's where the real challenge shows up. It's one thing to modulate a session and bring everybody in for a soft landing. It's when they don't land softly,
Yeah.
or they don't land at all, then it gets tricky, you know?
Yeah, and this is exactly what we're trying to kind of look at in our February seminar, because um, it does happen. And the more psychedelics are coming into mainstream, more people using them for therapeutic purposes, for spiritual purposes, just statistically, it's going to keep happening. More people going to come seeking help, be it, even emergency rooms, right? Somebody who hasn't come back, where do they go? So the people who are going to receive these patients, need to have a little bit wider awareness of different uses for plant medicines and psychedelics, and just be, I don't know if we can ever say that we can be really prepared and ready for something like this, because it's a deeply unsettling event for everybody, for the patient and for the circle of care. It's kind of, yeah, it's really out there. It's
Right.
difficult. It's hard. It's very vulnerable. It's very personal. But awareness that this happens, and it will happen. I'm gonna go on a limb here and say it will happen even if everybody has the best intentions, even if everybody is prepared, even if the intake was done correctly, because intake is actually something that's addressed often in psychedelic setting. We do a lot of things to prevent these kind of situations to happen, but they still happen and they will happen. So I think, in our seminar, we're not trying to talk about how to make sure that it's safe and it doesn't happen, but we're talking about, okay, we've done everything correctly, everything was good, but it still happened. So now what?
Right, right, right. So among the things that you have to think about in order to sort of anticipate this is the intake process. Are there certain people? I imagine there are certain people that if you interview them, or what you know about their psychological history, or, perhaps genetic proclivities and that sort of thing, certain people that you would definitely advise psychedelics are not for you. You should really. you should really not be taking psychedelics. What sort of uh, characteristics would you identify that would lead you to advise someone to stay away from psychedelics and maybe seek a different path?
Okay. And once again, I'm not a medical professional, but definitely either personal diagnosis like bipolar, schizophrenia. And bipolar is, it's kind of interesting because there is even a center in Costa Rica that specializes in using ayahuasca for bipolar, and they are developing a protocol for it. So, but generally, we believe that the risk outweighed any pros. Um, so definitely, yes, a history of mental health, like serious mental health disorders, um, in relatives, in parents. But the thing is, not everybody knows their family of origin, right? There might have been a history of this, and we don't know. There are some underlying conditions that people might not know about, or sometimes withholds information. Um, Personally, when I interviewed people for the retreats, going beyond the medical information, you generally want to look at the person and think how much support they have around them. Not only how much, let's say how well they hold it together on their own, but who is going to be around them if things kind of get tough, because things get tough even without going full on into psychotic episodes. We know psychedelics bring up a lot of things, so I would be curious to know, is a person, are they familiar with psychotherapy? Maybe they have some kind of counselor supporting them. Maybe they have a community elder. Maybe they are, a member of a large traditional community. So yeah, the support systems is something very important. um, so that's what I would be looking at. How stable they're on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And in a traditional context, where ayahuasca, for example, is part of the culture and accepted, so then there is a larger community that the person could look at for this kind of support. In our culture, psychedelics are only beginning to be accepted. So often, sometimes we say the real work begins on the plane home from the retreat, and if
Yeah.
you run into difficulties trying to integrate after the retreat, there's often no place to look. There's nowhere you could go to get help, if things start to fragment again. And I think this is something that Lee has experienced. He experienced a couple of these, but one of his episodes was in a situation where effectively there was no choice except to go to a psychiatric facility, and they completely misunderstood what was happening. I also, it just the remark you made a few minutes ago that there was a center in Costa Rica specializing in using ayahuasca to treat bipolar, and normally we would counsel someone with that condition not to take them, or schizophrenia. But I've also corresponded with schizophrenics who have experienced ayahuasca, who felt that it's been really healing for them in some cases. And this is not a recommendation for schizophrenics to take ayahuasca, but I think what it is it's a recognition that people are complex, and uh, people's interaction with these molecules, these drugs, is similarly complex, and for one person, a certain person in a ayahuasca experience who has schizophrenia and ayahuasca experience may be actually integrative, but I think it takes an exceptionally skilled facilitator to recognize that and guide someone through that kind of thing with this diagnosis of schizophrenia or bipolar. It's very tricky, but it can help. And these diagnostic categories are often rigid, and they sort of fail to recognize the fluidity of people's consciousness and experience. So I guess this is tricky territory, both for the patient and the facilitator.
Yes, I agree. I think, I'm speaking more from the position of, let's say, Western facilitator, right? Who, deals with a little bit different set of, responsibilities and even legalities. But when I go to Peru and I work with my Maestro Enrique, I have personally seen several Peruvian local patients who live with him who, we probably would have diagnosed, right? And I've seen him working with those people. In fact, last year I went, and there was an elderly man who spent several months in the forest with my teacher, and the patient was sent to the curandero by his family. And yes, clearly, as I said, like we would have diagnosed that person. And I've asked Enrique, so what is his journey like? What's going on? And I've seen that man in ceremony with us. And Enrique told me that 6 weeks ago that person wouldn't talk, and he wouldn't talk, like he wouldn't communicate.
Uh-huh.
He wasn't verbal, and so few months later, yeah, like we were able to have a conversation with that person. So definitely, I think there is a lot of things that we don't know, we don't understand, and yes, we are very complex.
Right, right. Yes, there's a lot of things we don't understand about the mind, about consciousness, and in any context, it's in some ways it's a guessing game. You need a very astute therapist or curator or practitioner to navigate that. And then when you introduce plant medicines into it, it further complicates it because, the whole point of that is, there are different ways to frame it, but you're exposing yourself to this experience to deliberately sort of disable your default mode network. That's the buzzword. That's the essentially the illusion that you create to keep yourself functional, ordinary consciousness. You're choosing to disable that. And that can be very therapeutic because it opens up, channels that are normally closed, but it could also be very dangerous and threatening for some people. And and there's no way to tell. Uh, so how can more Western biomedically oriented therapists who want to work in this area? There are many, many people who feel a calling to become psychedelic therapists. How would you suggest their education should encompass these kinds of possibilities? How do they prepare for that? Or do you prepare for it?
I'm sorry, prepare for what possibilities?
Well, if a person is training to become a psychedelic therapist, there's, certain protocols that they learn, expectations largely about orchestrating the set and setting, but do they receive enough instruction in how to handle situations like this when the therapeutic process that they're that they're shooting for goes off track in some ways. I mean, I think this is in part what we hope this conference can bring into focus. The conference is really the audience for the conference. We think are primarily therapeutic medical professionals. Whether
Right.
certified and all that, or whether they're simply what you might call underground facilitators or people with that kind of experience, but people who want to dedicate and develop the skills to handle this. So that's who should come to this
Okay.
event.
Thank you. Yes, now I understand your question. Um, I'm looking forward to expanding my own perception and view on this and on this question. But what comes up for me right away um, is sensitivity, developing therapist's own sensitivity, and the trust in their senses, right? So in a way, it's kind of coming back to our senses, right? Not even necessarily following, the protocols to the T, because again, this break with the reality is very subjective, and it's different. There are similarities between all of them, but in the end, it's very much rooted in this one particular patient's story and their perception. So the therapist's or the facilitator's ability to sense, um, emphasize, and bring, compassion, which is empathy with action, into the session. I think this is what is crucial. The relational skill where um, we can fluidly follow, holding the space for our clients, not as a rigid container holding space, but almost following them while holding that space around them as they go, so they can go on the journey. Because this is also what we will be talking during the seminar. What is a psychosis and what is a spiritual emergency, right? Lots of shamanic cultures see this as actually a positive thing. This is a rite of passage, and many people who go through this experience, they talk about it as something that actually was beneficial. So we don't, in my perspective, we don't want to necessarily change that course of that person's journey. We just want to keep them, safe, maybe physically safe, people around them safe, so they can have that space to go through what is happening to them. And I know, there's different depths, let's say, to which people go when they're in these moments. Some people don't recognize who they are, where they are. Some people kind of come above the water sometimes. So in those moments when they emerge from under the water, so that they can see the compassionate uh, person holding space, and a person who can have at least some lived experience. It doesn't mean that we all have to go, to the over the edge of reality, but it would be beneficial for, the therapist to have had difficult journeys. I don't believe in bad trips, difficult journeys and what it might feel like, right? Yeah, holding, flexible space while being connected through all of the senses to your patient.
Right. Yeah, I think you've touched on something very important here. How would you see the difference between how would you distinguish between a psychotic episode and a spiritual emergency? Or is there a difference? Or is the difference in the way that in the response of the therapists? I mean, say a little bit about.
Mhm. And again, I think, Yaris actually will bring a great perspective into that question during our seminar. So I'm just going to answer from my limited understanding. I know that there are some objective factors. Term spiritual emergency, as actually Yarisa pointed out, is not clearly defined yet. It's almost like a suggestion. um, I think, there is difference in basically how far the person have gone, like how much awareness they have about what's happening, degree to which they are dissociated from the consensus reality. What I would rather speak, without using the term spiritual emergency, is let's say shamanic initiation versus psychosis, right? And there I would talk about the external perspective, how the facilitator, curandero, or the therapist views the person who is going through this difficult time. Are they seeing as somebody who is sick, or I don't know all of the words, or are they seen as somebody
Is
who
this
emerges?
something that they need to correct, something they need to fix, or something they need to help the person through the journey? And then they become more akin to the shamanic initiation. So when they get through it, they are back together in terms of being functional, but they're not the same person they were when they started the journey.
Exactly.
And in some
and
ways, they
and
may be a
yeah.
better person, more integrated, more improved on many levels. I can speak to this personally,
Personally.
because, I mean, I had, and people have read about the experiment at La Chorrera and my brother and that whole mythos about us at La Chorrera, but I had a prolong after eating way too many mushrooms and sort of buying into the delusional space that mushrooms can take you. I had a break from reality that lasted about 2 weeks. And uh and to and it's interesting because in our party there were people who were appalled at this, and there was like, we have to get this guy to a psychiatric facility. Well, I was in the middle of the Amazon. This was not really an option. But that was I mean, and from the outside, it looked like I was really disengaged. Let's face it, I was batshit crazy. I mean, but then my brother, who was also in an altered state of a kind of a complementary way, but he could communicate with me and I could communicate with him. And his whole approach was, it's okay. This is unfolding the way it's supposed to. Just be patient. I, and as a result, and because there was no option to leave, and get airlifted to some hospital someplace, it had to play out. And I've always been grateful to him of sort of holding the line and just just let it happen, because it did turn out to be, you know, I mean, I have no claims to be a shaman. I'm not saying that, but it was an initiatory experience. And as difficult as it was, I'm grateful for that. I felt, and I still feel, that it was one of the most valuable experiences of my life, and it made me a better person. It certainly made me a more humble person. Others will disagree. I'm not particularly, but it was a valuable experience, and because he protected me in that way and insisted that it had to happen, I was able to literally put myself back together on my own schedule, in my own time, so that when I finally did reemerge, as you put it, return to the surface, uh, it was a it was it was a definitely a therapeutic thing, and I was a better person for it, and I feel like, but, man, that sort of model is not easy to follow if you're in a biomedical context. If you're in a traditional context, you can do that. If you're in a biomedical context, you'd be threatened with malpractice if you didn't take some steps to try to avert this, sometimes to intervene. And you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and maybe this is what we can discuss.
Right, right.
Yeah.
We have to, I think the therapeutic community has got to define some boundaries, for tolerating this kind of thing, and because a person seems severely divorced or estranged from reality, that is not necessarily a bad thing. In some ways, it can be an opportunity for complete reintegration, and I mean, that's why people are taking these things, really for
Yeah.
the kinds of transformative experiences, and it's not all fuzzy bunnies and happy hippies. I mean, these experiences are difficult, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
I don't want to glorify those experiences, but few people that I have met who have gone through such experiences in kind of shamanic settings, they have all gained a lot from those. They're definitely not to be seeked out, but yeah, I don't believe it's something that needs to be fixed and treated in this particular kind of scenario.
right.
And we are, we are bringing ancient traditions into, as you said, biomedical kind of paradigm existed for far less time. So I think, as uh, as kind of Western practitioners, we can also exercise some humility and learn from people who do know best in this particular
Right.
context.
We have to listen to our elders, our indigenous brothers and sisters in that way. And I'm particularly happy that we'll be able to talk to some of those people that were involved when Lee was having his difficulties, his
Mm-hmm.
psychotic episodes or prolonged altered states or whatever in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones that intervened, that were called on to help him through it. And his experience with them was much more healing, much more integrative than what he was offered in the hospital when it happened another time, and where it was viewed as he described it, basically they viewed it as a drug abuse problem. Your problem is you're on drugs. You're an addict, which is absurd, of course, and it's none of that. Uh, I mean, you knew Lee before any of this happened, and you've had a relationship with him over the several times that it has happened, right? So you're sort of a supporter for him for a long time through these different episodes that he's had. Uh, and I don't want to, say too much. I mean, it's a very personal thing, but what is what I guess what are your reflections on that relationship over time that you've seen? Because Lee, whatever he's gone through, he's come through. I mean, he's clearly a very intelligent, very stable, balanced, and wise person.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I met Lee, he was, well, clearly much younger, biologically, but also I've met him when he drank for the first time, right? And I witnessed him kind of, well, as it happens to many of us, we fall in love with this process, right? Enamored with the experience. And one thing that I am noticing, and definitely, this is no personal criticism, but I would think, one piece that I think he missed in his story, and what I'm trying to share with other people, if you're going to really go all out, go to Peru, spend, months and years, doing these medicines, have a mentor.
Have I been?
if if
Mhm.
he had somebody, it doesn't even have to be, well, we all dream of having a teacher. We go to South America with this idea that the shaman is going to see us and say, okay, you're my next student. Okay, that doesn't happen. And that's not even necessary. But having, one person, that can be a person, in a different country, but who has experience. And now there are a lot of us, 20 years ago, there were no mentors. But now just having somebody with whom you can talk about what's happening to you, because some of the things that have happened to Lee wouldn't have happened
Mhm.
if there was somebody to whom he was listening.
And in some ways, you were that mentor for him.
No. Not back then. No, no, no. We were more like, he wasn't really taught. Like, it has to come from the person. If the person needs to ask for advice, right? It's not really my place to. I mean, I can say like, okay, Lee, like that sounds like a lot, or maybe don't do that. But we didn't have that relationship. The mentee and a mentor. It's a therapeutic almost relationship, and it has to be clearly defined. I was not that person for him.
Okay. Okay. Have you had experience with other people that have been in situations similar to Lee's?
Yes, but not as strongly. I did witness somebody who, yeah, kind of lost touch with reality after dieta, after planned dieta, after being in isolation in the forest, taking non-psychoactive medicines for 10 days. It was not such a strong case. There was no hospital or medical staff involved. It lasted, well, it did last for months, but it was obvious that it was gradually reducing. So I never had to actually, luckily, I'm grateful, I never had to hold space for such an intense story as Lee's.
Interesting. Yeah, well, the dieta itself is, pretty stressful. It can be. I can see how that might put you in a prolonged altered state because you're really affecting your physiology in some profound ways, even though you're not acutely taking plant medicines, but it does affect you. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like it is a whole purpose of the dieta to kind of go into the altered state that's not induced necessarily by chemicals, but there is very limited, food options, no salt, and isolation, right?
Right.
That's a big factor, and that's what shamanic plant dieta shares with other traditions like vision quests in North America. Sort of kind of very deep introspective state, and it can go pretty deep.
Right, right. And most people can get through it, and some find it difficult, and many people can't complete the dieta. It's the temptation to quit, which is probably the right decision in some cases. So,
It's always difficult. It's always difficult for different reasons. When I used to host dietas in the forest, people would ask me, what is difficult? I'm like, I don't know what's going to be your story, if it's going to be mosquitoes, the food, or something else. But something is going to bug you, and
yes,
your job will have to be to get through it.
absolutely. Well, adversity, can be a spiritual practice. I mean, that's why ascetics starve themselves and spend, months in the desert and this kind of thing, because obviously this puts you in a very uh, complex biochemical state. I mean, food, the dietas, are not psychoactive, but they are biochemical systems like any food, and they have properties and that might affect your state of mind. And, the distinction often especially well, the distinction between food and medicine is often artificial. And I think in indigenous societies, this is recognized. And I think was it who, Hippocrates, that said, let your food be your medicine. And there's great
Right.
truth to that. We are, at the end of the day, we are biochemical systems, and we're interacting with a complex chemical ecology. I mean, all these plants with all this vast array of secondary products that, some of which are psychoactive and some of which affect physiology in other ways. We're not separate from those. So it's a complex thing. So, what else would you like to touch on that we haven't touched on? We've both been kind of raving, and it's a fairly unstructured conversation, but
I just want, since, the seminar is really kind of the primary focus of this podcast, what I wanted to say, what excites me the most is that from having conversations with all the panelists, I think we're all coming with the understanding that we are opening a possibility for new learning to emerge. Like we are kind of creating this liminal space where we're all going to go in and put, our energies in and allow new understandings to emerge. So this is not the type of seminar where, teachers come in and tell you how it is. No, we're bringing different perspectives from indigenous people to psychiatrists to researchers, and we're through variety of ways, including the creative expression, we're allowing it to shape something new. And I find a beautiful collaboration across multiple disciplines. And I'm excited to see what maybe it's even questions. I don't know if we're going to get any answers, but it could be questions that we haven't thought about before. It could be different insights, surprises. That's what I'm excited about.
all right. Well, I am too. I think this is going to be a significant seminar. I think it's going to be very, very valuable for people that want to be practitioners or maybe they are experienced, but there's always room for more learning. I understand there is an opportunity for continuing education credits, and
Mhm.
if and this is the website which I put the link in to the chat room, and also uh, they can uh, they can contact you, right? And
Yeah,
your address
it's
is
on
on,
the page.
on
Yeah.
that website. So Mariya is the organizer of this and the main contact person. So we do, and we'll be putting out more information. We'll release this podcast closer to the actual event. And yes, I think we have a great opportunity to do something that will attract a lot of interest and be helpful to people, either whether they've had experiences similar to Lee's, or whether they're traditional practitioners or biomedical practitioners, or something in between. There's something here for everybody, and it's the McKenna Academy's mission to educate people about all of these factors. So I thank you for taking the opportunity and suggesting this, and being so professional in the way that you've organized this and so on. So I
Thank
think
you.
we have a stellar panel of a variety of expertise, and I think many people will see this and they'll sign up and will propagate this knowledge. So thank you so.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Dennis, thank you. It's an honor to speak to you, and I'm excited for more.
me too. Me too. Looking forward to it. All right. Well, happy holidays, and we'll
And
be
you
on.
too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye bye.